I think we have
Oh,
Tsitsi. Hello, hello. Hi.
finally managed. I hope the connection keeps up. Anyway, we'll see.
So do I. I was just telling everyone that that it was one of my worst nightmares come true, which is basically that the technology on one of these lives fails and I'm sitting on my own waiting for my counterpart and
Well,
thinking of ways to entertain myself and everyone else. But I'm so delighted you could join us.
thank you. I'm sorry it took a while, but here we are.
Here we are.
Yeah.
Welcome, Tsitsi Dangarembga, author of this Mournable Body. We have been entertaining ourselves while waiting for you by talking about your trilogy. This Mournable Body is the triumphant conclusion of a trilogy which has represented 30 years work for you. Good things come in threes. You've produced 3 books over 30 years. And this Mournable Body has very rightly been shortlisted for the Booker Prize. You're on the brink of the Booker, which will be announced this Thursday. Huge congratulations. How does it feel?
It feels wonderful, Sarah. As you said, it's been 30 years writing this trilogy. And at some point in that 30 years, I never thought it would happen. And it was just a case of plodding on when I could. And finally, the books were published, and now the recognition, it's really beautiful. I'm so grateful to everyone involved and to the readers and to people like you know, who say lovely things and write lovely papers, and it's just fantastic.
It's the moment almost every author dreams of. Your editor or your agent calls you up. You know, they say that you've been longlisted, they call you up, they say that you've been shortlisted. It's a scenario that we all picture ourselves in. What was it like for you the moment that dream did come true? Where were you and how did you hear the news?
I was at home, and it was my publisher, Louisa Joyner, who called me up from Faber and gave me the news about being longlisted. And that was wonderful. But, you know, longlisted, it's a funny thing because you think, okay, that's great, but it doesn't really have such a great impact on one's career. It's really the shortlist that makes the difference. And so then there was the 6-week wait or whatever it was, and the thinking, oh, am I going to make that shortlist? And then she called, and I remember saying, oh, Louisa, do you have good news for me? And she said, yes, I do have good news. And that was really what made the difference, because the shortlist is one step, and people really begin to look at your work and to take you more seriously as a writer. And it's been a fabulous 2 months. It really has been, being able to engage with people, interviews, talking about my book, being on panels with the other writers, because here in Harare, I don't get much of that. So it's just been beautiful in every sense of the word.
Let's celebrate the book. Let us talk about this Mournable Body. It is, as we've said, the conclusion of a trilogy. You pick up the story of your protagonist, Tambudzai, with whom, in a sense, both you and Zimbabwe, your homeland, have grown up. You started in nervous conditions, on the sort of brink of independence, with Tambudzai on the brink of adulthood. Can you set the book up for us? Tell us where we are now and what her challenge is in this novel, this concluding novel.
Yes, so Tambudzai has gone through her education. She has a degree. She's had a job in an advertising agency. That should have been a good job, but it was just at the time of independence. And there was still a lot of disparity in wages between white people and black people and men and women. And so being a black woman, her wages were very low, but at the same time, the white men who controlled the agency were plagiarizing her copy. And so she left. This meant that she was now jobless on the job market, but since she was getting on in life, it wasn't so easy to get another job. She hadn't been able to buy a house, so she's living in a hostel with much younger women, and her prospects look horrible when this Mournable Body opens.
Yeah, I mean, it's in a way, it is the kind of novel where your protagonist has hit what she thinks is rock bottom, and then we find out there's even lower she can go. She's an anti-heroine in many ways, and that's one of the things I find so attractive and compelling about her. We follow her from one disaster to another, but there's something about her sensibility and her outlook that keeps us with her and in her corner. I think one of her distinguishing features is anger. And you and I have talked about this sense that not only is it impossible for women in novels to be angry, female characters, without causing a stir. It's impossible for women writers to write about anger without causing a stir. So I want to ask you, what is your reaction to this sort of charge of, you know, anger and manifesting anger in your protagonist, in particular as a Black female writer in this sort of post-colonial tradition?
Yeah, Sarah, I was a good young feminist in the 1980s, and we had a lot of kind of feminist consciousness raising and training. And one of the themes that we used to talk about was anger and the necessity of getting in touch with one's anger and being able to engage with it and process it and not to be afraid of it, and to know that anger is just energy. And it's a potential force for good as well as a potential force for destruction. And so from that background, I've always been very conscious of the need for women to express their anger. And I have tried to bring that out in my novels. Sometimes that anger is destructive, for example, with the Nyasha character in Nervous Conditions, but that's because she's young. And so I think we see a kind of progression and maturity in handling anger with the way that Tambudzai now does handle her anger. Of course, she turns a lot inside to begin with, but then she starts to turn it outside. Unfortunately, she often misdirects it at the wrong people. But as the book progresses, there is the sense that she is defining those things that are constraining her more and learning how to deal with them. And so I think it's really very important that critics and people who talk about literature like yourself really pick up on this very angry thing, on this very important issue of anger, because I have yet to see a really angry woman in a woman of color in literature. You know, and it really would be nice. I mean, Tambudzai gets into such a rage that she goes and buries a bag of mealie meal that her mother gave her in the garden, and she sort of like digs a hole for dear life. That's an expression of rage. And it's good to know that there are different ways that we can express our rage. So when Tambudzai digs the hole, it is after she has expressed her rage in a more destructive manner by physically abusing one of her students. And I just think it's something that we really need to look at, because it's a kind of a release. And this is what I hope that people feel. You know, so many of us women of color, Black women on the continent and off, are going through our lives and having to swallow so much. And we might talk about it with friends, but I think it's different. Like when you see it in narrative, whether you read it in a book or you see it in a film, and you're able to connect at a level that is not easy to connect when you're actually talking to other people. And so I think you've raised a really important point. I still feel, sorry, I just wanted to say that I still feel that there's a long way to go in the way we start depicting ourselves in our anger and the targets of our anger and the suggestions that we can put forward for dealing with it. But I do think that this Mournable body tried to engage with that problematic.
It is anger channeled through art. And you've mentioned the bag of mealie meal, which did cause me several times during the very enjoyable experience of reading this novel to say, oh no, here is the bag of mealie meal again, because of course it's hugely symbolic. This is a novel which is freighted in with symbols and symbolism, but never burdened by it. It's elevated by the symbolism. And you start with this wonderfully surreal image of Tambudzai, your protagonist, looking at herself in the mirror, but seeing a very warped and strange thing reflected back at her. And it brings me back to what I was saying about the way this whole writing project for you has tracked not just your own maturation, but also the growth of a nation. And I wondered if part of this project is shaking that nation awake, is really, you know, taking Zimbabwe by the shoulders and saying, look, listen. And I asked that question because I know that you feel very much that this channeling anger through art is part of how we can engage in productive but also joyous resistance.
Absolutely, Sarah. Yes, Tambudzai begins by looking in the mirror, and she sees a very distorted reflection of herself. And, you know, I have done that. I don't know how many people have done that, but when one isn't feeling so good and you look at yourself in the mirror and you think, oh no, I just can't face myself. So I also think it's probably a more common experience, maybe not to the extent that Tambudzai had it, but we have an idea. And of course, Tambudzai is every Zimbabwean. And so it's talking about Zimbabweans not being able to look in the mirror. What is it that makes it very difficult for us to look into the mirror? Is it because when we do, we see things that are monstrous to us? Or we just don't want to bother because we're so busy embezzling money and, you know, not obeying traffic regulations and bribing the police. So we don't have time to look into the mirror. But that was definitely one of the questions that I posed there. And as at the end of the book, Tambudzai is in a situation where she isn't looking into a mirror, but she's looking into her mother's eyes. And these are the eyes of the mother who sent her the mealie meal that she refused to eat. And the question there is she going to have another outcome now that she is looking into another surface in which she is reflected? What is her reaction going to be? Is it going to be that same reaction of seeing something ghastly that she turns away from, or is it going to be a different reaction? And I really would hope that Zimbabweans would take that point, because until we look into the mirror and engage with whatever we see there, whether it is a raging being or whether it is a monstrous being, we are not going to find our true selves. So it's really important.
You said there that in a way she is every Zimbabwean, and that leads me on to something I really want to talk to you about, which is form. You've written this novel in the second person. It seems to me to be a form which embodies the feelings of alienation that might mirror the post-colonial experience, in particular in Zimbabwe, but also it implicates the reader. There is no way that the reader can escape the feeling when immersed in this novel that he or she is also Tambudzai in some way. What were your intentions when you were thinking about form and about structuring the novel this way?
Sarah, I came to the second person after many attempts to write it in the first person, as the other two books in the trilogy were in the first person, and it simply didn't work because the narrator in the first person was talking about such terrible things. It sounded almost like a confession, and I found that it was either going into the direction of victimhood. I did this because it was so awful, or it was going into some kind of callousness. Well, I had to do this because what else could I do? And that wasn't the tone I wanted to strike. I wanted to strike a slightly more distanced tone where one could self-reflect. And so I just tried out the second person, also remembering that sometimes when things happen to one, things that are really quite emotionally challenging and one needs to communicate that, one does not go and say I. You know, one also wants some distance and maybe to hide a little bit. And so we do tend to use that you form even when we talk about ourselves sometimes. And that signals confession, and it establishes this intimacy that you are talking about. So I think the reader is hovering in between actually being the you addressed and understanding that this is an intimate confession that is being told to me. And I think that might be an interesting positioning for a reader. Of course, I didn't experience it myself because I wrote it, so I couldn't experience it that way. But from what people tell me, I think it did work.
Very effectively. But I'm going to use the second person pronoun with you now and ask you, Tsitsi, how do you think writing this trilogy has changed you? Because we go back to my point that you have also grown up in the process of writing these books, you know, moved through your own adulthood.
One thing that I really found when I was writing, moving through nervous conditions where one of the main conflicts is with Babamkuru, the male patriarchal figure, is that although patriarchy is something that we as Black women are aware of, and many of us have taken up the struggle against, there are subtle struggles which might be even more impactful at that personal subjective level within the gender. So this struggle that Tambudzai has with her mother.
I think we've lost. Are we back? There you are. Yes. Tambudzai's struggle with her mother.
Yeah, so I was just saying that the struggle with the mother, it signified to me the need for women of color, Black women, to engage with our struggles within the gender, as well as our struggles across demographics, like across race and across class. Uh, yeah, we have also got to narrow it down to look at those things that separate us as Black women. And I have found that that is the ongoing struggle, because it is so much more difficult to define and nail down and to theorize. So it has changed my brand of feminism, actually. Writing this trilogy has changed my brand of feminism.
In what way? Do you mean having to look at the sort of intra-gender issues as well as everything else?
Yes, I find that I look at patriarchy through that lens of asking myself, however, how do women behave towards each other? And of course, classical feminism would say that is because of internalized patriarchy. And that may or may not be true. But for me, that begs the question that even if there is internalized patriarchy, why do we embrace it? You know, rather than see the commonality more. And yeah, that's something that I'm very concerned with at the moment.
It is something I think that is reflected so marvelously in the book. I wish we had time to talk more about it, but it is one of my books of the year, and I'm so delighted for you that you've been able to celebrate, even during very difficult personal and national circumstances, that you've been able to celebrate this well-deserved shortlisting. And I'm wishing you all the best for Thursday. I believe it's Thursday, for Thursday night, when I will be tuning in. Thank you so much, Tsitsi Dangarembga. Thank you for joining us, and we'll be tuning in on Thursday.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Thank you to everybody who joined this evening. Bye now.
Hi.
Oh, hi.
Did you see me that whole time?
No, I could just see you now with that delightful laugh, the one we all do when we're like, oh, good, the technology has worked. The laugh of relief.
I know I've been in like empty voids a lot lately, just trying to click the right button and then failing to do so.
That may actually be the title for all of our 2020 memoirs. Empty voids trying to click the right button. Welcome, Diane Cook. Before you joined us, I was telling everyone online that you are the author of The New Wilderness, which is shortlisted for the Booker Prize. So you're on the verge of one of the big nights of your life on Thursday. Yeah. Whatever happens, massive celebration.
Yeah. Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I'm so excited.
It is the moment every author dreams of, certainly every novelist dreams of. The big B, your editor or your agent calls you up and they say, you're going to be on a show with Barack Obama. How did that feel?
The big B.
Because of course he's going to be joining the Booker celebrations on Thursday. How does it feel to be part of this? And where did you get the call? How did you get the news?
Oh, I heard that my editor sent me an email because it was really late, or it was really early here, and she was sending it in the morning in the UK. And I was actually up in the middle of the night nursing my baby. I had a baby in June, so I was nursing him, like scrolling through my phone, and then I got the news, and it was amazing. I was so excited. And then the Obama news was even possibly just as exciting.
Now, I think that's a perfect image. You couldn't actually have scripted it better, that you've written one of the year's books about motherhood and you got this news while nursing your relative newborn. It's been a big year for you, so double congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
Let's talk about your book, although I would love to talk about your baby. Can you set it up for us? Tell us a bit about what it's about and maybe give us a short reading to give us a flavor of it.
Yeah, great. I'd love to. The New Wilderness is about a future U.S. That has been just kind of changed, altered, broken down by climate change, by overpopulation. And there's to the point where there's only one wilderness area left in the entire country, and all other land is being used for all these other reasons. And my book follows a group of 20 people who take part in an experiment to go live in this one last wilderness. It's called the Wilderness State. And the idea is to kind of see what happens when people and nature interact, because that kind of thing in my telling of the future has been lost to history. And the book really mainly follows a mother and her daughter who are part of the experiment. And the mother, was born in the city and raised in the city, and the daughter is, growing up in this completely different environment, and she'll be changed by this place in ways that her mother won't be. And so I really was interested in, the pressure on people who have to give up so much of what they know in order to survive. Oh, I didn't even say the most important part. The daughter is really sick in the city. She has to go away in order to survive. She needs new, better air to breathe. So the mother takes her as part of this experiment to save her life. And in doing so, exposes her to this completely new way of life. And she'll change in these ways that will kind of break their relationship apart. So it's like really looking at relationships to one another and relationships from people to the land.
And it thematically, the novel pulls quite hard on the threads that are woven through your masterful short story collection, which I absolutely adored.
Oh, thank you.
Man v. Nature. And in a myriad number of ways in that book, and also in this one, you interrogate what your protagonists do after the world has ended. So I know you get lots and lots of questions about why are you obsessed with writing about the end of the world? But I see it differently. I think your project is to write about how we start over and whether we can reinvent ourselves if we have to. So I want to ask if you'd agree with that reading of your work, but also what is it about starting over that you're obsessed with writing about?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I do love the idea of endings, but in part because endings imagine a new beginning. And for me, like, I mean, some people have asked me, well, why didn't you write, you know, like the big terrible things that climate change brought on the world, or why didn't you write about the first days or weeks or years of the people in the experiment? Because the book picks up with when they've already been there for a couple of years and life is kind of a little boring at that point. And I always say, because I'm not interested in that drama. I'm not interested in the like things blowing up. I don't want to write the big action movie. I want to write the movie that's about people. So I wanted to write the book about people, and I wanted to write about how people adapt to a new environment and what they find in the future, especially if it's an inhospitable future, like what they find to keep themselves going. Because I think the thing that we all connect on is a desire to be alive and a desire to survive in every choice that we make. And that's the thing that I want to really look at. And that's why I push people to like an end point and then see what they do next.
And in pushing them to this end point, your community, which includes Bea, the mother, and Agnes, her young daughter, they're almost forced to live prehistorically. And so then as an author, you're forced to look at what remains. Largely the relationships, you're looking at how they interact when there's almost nothing left except this very challenging terrain that they're forced to cross. And at the core of the book is that mother-daughter relationship. That's where your lens is fixed. It's the relationship that endures even when there's no monogamy, there's motherhood. I had lots of fun rereading this book to prepare for this interview, thinking, what would Bea be putting on her Instagram account? You know, how would she be carefully curating this experience of motherhood in the wilderness? But you're really exploring ideas about ambivalence in motherhood, ideas about the fundamental selfishness, in a way, how the instinct to survive knocks against the instinct to procreate and nurture your own young. At one point, I wrote it down because I was so struck by it. Bea says, motherhood is like a heavy coat that she's compelled to put on no matter the weather. It's such a refreshing take because, of course, motherhood doesn't make women superheroes. It doesn't make us equipped to be perfect mothers. What were you interrogating in the novel about this idea of motherhood trying to survive in very extreme conditions?
I really wanted to push on the idea of the perfect mother, you know, who would do anything for their children, who would give up anything, do anything. That's like the thing that, I mean, mothers and parents are often like that idea is put upon them, that we become these saintly, inhuman beings, you know, without a drive of our own. And it's not true. And so I mean, what better way to explore that than to have a mother have to give up literally everything she's ever known in order to save her daughter, meaning like all comfort, all security, all food, like all, you know, all shelter. Like she changes every aspect of her life in order to save her daughter. And she isn't always happy about it, and that feels very real to me. It doesn't mean she's a bad mom. She's a particular kind of mother, but there's no doubt, to me anyway, that she loves Agnes and would do it again. It's just that it's not going to be this beautiful story about sacrifice. It can't be, because she's a human and she has her feelings. And if we're really writing a book about real people, or reading a book about real people, we want to see all of that. I do anyway. I want to see all all of the murkiness that's under the facade, because those are the things that make me feel better about the feelings that I have as a as a person, and maybe as a mother sometimes.
Certainly made me feel better as well. I think there's strength in numbers and telling the truth about the experience. Speaking of getting real, can we have a little reading from you to kind of get a flavor of the novel? I think you're going to read from the beginning, which is, you know, as real as it gets. It starts real and then continues real, this novel.
Yeah.
So just to set it up for us before we continue discussing it.
Yeah, great. And so this is just the beginning. I'm just going to jump right in. The baby emerged from B the color of a bruise. B burned the cord somewhere between them and uncoiled it from the girl's slight neck. And though she knew it was useless, swept her daughter up into her hands, tapped on her soft chest, and blew a few shallow breaths into her slimy mouth. Around her, the singular song of crickets expanded. B's skin prickled from heat. Sweat dried on her back and face. The sun had crested and would, more quickly than seems right, fall again. From where B knelt, she saw their valley, its secret grasses and sage. In the distance were lonely buttes and closer mud mounds that looked like cairns marking the way somewhere. The caldera stood sharp and white on the horizon. B dug into the hard earth with a stick, then a stone, then hollowed and smoothed it with her hands. She scooped the placenta into it, and then the girl. Stop there.
It's a beautiful example of the way the sort of lyrical quality of your writing connects your protagonists, and you have double protagonists, to this land that they're trying to inhabit, that they're seeking all kinds of things from. We'll come back to what they're seeking, but I want to talk about both protagonists because you tell the story to begin with from the mother's perspective, but you do switch. We hear directly from Agnes. It becomes a kind of Bildungsroman from Agnes's point of view. It's her coming of age in the wilderness. It reflects, when you look at the two stories as mirror images, you see that the child's gain represents some kind of loss for the mother, not just a loss of herself because she's subsuming herself into motherhood, but also a loss of the child moving away. And you start with that scene, which reflects kind of experience of loss as a mother. Was that something that you had in mind, kind of running through the book as an undercurrent?
Yeah, I knew that the book for me was always going to be about different kinds of losses, and especially losses in a lineage of women. And, you know, part of the reason for starting the book where first of all, that was always the beginning, which, I mean, it was at some point it became a conscious decision for it to be the beginning, but it was like the very first thing that I wrote. It was the thing that launched me into the book. And it always made sense as the place to start with B because she is such a thorny character and she makes decisions that are hard to swallow sometimes when you're reading. And I always wanted there to be a sense that she'd been through something already, like that she has given up a lot and she is affected by that sacrifice, and she's affected by, you know, these little pockets of loss that she still feels for her way of life, for her mother, for the things that were, you know, in her old life, and that she also still has this love for Agnes, but also this worry for the future and worry for a world that she might have brought another child into. I wanted to, in a scene, to like render her completely, like I wanted you to see all of her in one scene, and this is how it came to be.
The other thing we see in that scene is the world. It struck me that this novel also opens with an image of a woman digging in the dirt. She's engaged in an act of burial. It's post-trauma, but she is framed by this world and it's established in this opening scene. It's nature writing, and it sort of caused a kind of hallelujah response in me, because it's nature writing, but it's definitely not Wordsworth or Thoreau, I guess, if you're American. And thank goodness for that, because historically we've inherited this sense that nature writing is, it's a boys' club and it's all about romantic notions of nature. And you're really smashing through those here. At one point, B says, there used to be a cultural belief that living closely with nature made one a better person. But there are all kinds of things going on in the relationships of various characters to the land here. Agnes grows to love it. There's a band of rangers who seem to combine the sadistic with the mundane, and they're enforcing the rules about how your community that you've built is allowed to inhabit the land and move through it without leaving an impact. But there's also at the core, I think, this idea of how women interact with nature. There's an idea, or there are ideas throughout the novel, that women will always inevitably leave parts of themselves behind. They menstruate, they give birth, they experience stillbirths. And I was wondering about what your take is on writing now as a woman about the wilderness, but also being a woman in the wilderness, whether you think that's developing, and if so, in what way?
I mean, I think I've always thought a lot about the wilderness has always been kind of a man's place. And which is funny, because if you think about the lives of animals, which is something that the book tries to do, is kind of like show us, where we fit on an animal spectrum. A lot of animal groups are run by the females, so I really wanted to push on that, and I wanted to give wilderness back to women. I mean, that's what it felt like it was like giving it back to, not creating something new thing. Yeah, like not creating a new thing for them, just like giving it back, like this was yours. Here you go. So yeah, that was always something that was really, really important to me to do. And I just was interested in writing about women in that space too. And I think for women, like generally the wilderness can be, the wilderness, first of all, is like this construct that only really means what you want it to mean. And it is a place that can feel kind of dangerous when lots of spaces feel dangerous for women, and women alone especially. And when you're exposed, like when we think of being out in the middle of a wild place, we feel maybe exposed, or like we're more prey than predator. And I think those are all feelings that women have in lots of different spaces. So I really wanted to put them in a place that might have felt traditionally difficult for women, and make them excel there, because it seemed like they would to me.
And that's exactly what happens with one of your dual protagonists, B's daughter, Agnes. The family comes on this pilgrimage, if you like the old pilgrimages to Bath, or seeking the health cure, a water cure or something, except they're escaping the toxic city for this wilderness. And so she comes to this environment very young, and she assimilates in a way, she adapts. Reading Agnes's chapters, she's aware of the danger, but she isn't affected by it in the same way as outsiders are. And the dangers, I think, are twofold. There's the danger of the natural and quite harsh at times environment, but also these rangers I mentioned, who seem to sort of patrol and enforce lots of needless and badly explained rules. And there's a real sense of menace coming from both of those quarters in the novel. But Agnes is able to deal with it. And it got me wondering at times whether, because I insisted on reading this as a feminist take on nature writing, whether part of the point of Agnes is a kind of experimental, can we grow up without the patriarchy, without that structure? And if so, what is the impact on it? So does she have a girlhood that's free from patriarchy or not in the world of this novel?
I think so. I mean, she has a girlhood free from so much of what might influence us that I personally would like connect back to the patriarchy, but maybe other people wouldn't. So she begins the book in the city. I mean, not the book, but she begins her life in the city. she starts, you know, like any girl is going to. She has like her pink room and her frilly socks, and she's a girl in the world, you know. She's a little girl in the world, and then she gets brought to this place, and she becomes a fierce, like, she becomes something that I can't even put words to, because it's so untainted by society. It's untainted by any kind of expectation of what she should or would look like or do or feel or say or think, or how she would behave. I felt like in putting her in the wilderness, she gets to be a pure person. Um, and I mean, like, probably not 100%, but as pure a person as you could imagine, you know, hope to be. And to me, that has to play into partly that it's because there's none of this expectation, male gaze, patriarchy, you know, just there's no bounds for her. She's boundless in the wilderness. And even though they're hemmed in by boundaries, even, you know, like they can't go past certain places, or no one can enter, or they have to go here and they have to go there, but she feels boundless to me. And I think that is because she didn't grow up under this, in that like snow globe of the place that what we all grow up in, under this like shield of like, you know, there's like no getting out of the certain systems that we're in. But she doesn't have that. And that was, as I'll say, that was like the really fun part to explore with her.
It was also incredibly fun to read. One of the things that was fun about it is that she has a kind of natural impulse to lead. She sees no reason why she shouldn't be the leader of this group. She almost sees no boundary between childhood and adulthood. She's a fully empowered child because it's her world, in a sense, more than it is the world of the adults who are supposed to be telling her what to do. And that was quite a refreshing take on the Bildungsroman, I think. Mm-hmm. It leads me actually to another reading that I found, because, you know, this novel could be read on so many levels. One, as an allegory for the origin stories of America. You know, you're following, the members of the community are required to move. They can never stay according to these rules that are imposed on them in one place too long. And so the book considers the reasons why people have moved throughout history, to conquer, to explore, to survive, to escape. There's a really fascinating turn where once your characters have started occupying this land for long enough, they start to see it as theirs, and outsiders start arriving, and they perceive that influx as aggression, whether it is or not. So I was thinking the whole time while I was reading that it's not just a climate change story or a post-climate change story, but it's a refugee story. And in a sense, climate stories are refugee stories.
Yeah.
This is the scenario that's already playing out for so many people in the world now, being moved around, forced to flee, and subject to these sort of endless, merciless bureaucracies. Was that something that you had in mind kind of consciously while you were writing as well?
Definitely. At first, when I was thinking about that, I was thinking more about these great migrations over history, you know, like of people who needed to escape whatever their situation was at home because the opportunities were there. And so, you know, like whether you're thinking of a westward migration in the US, or, you know, coming over to the New World, people looking for something better. And then I began to think about it once I had my characters and I was really moving them around the land. I, of course, obviously then started thinking about land in the US, and without, you can't like think about land in America without thinking about who used to live there and what happened to their lives when those people came over looking for their way of, you know, their new opportunity. So it began to get really murky, and the you know, the what becomes something that you understand and sympathize with as far as the community goes, or whether they come and do this thing and they are living this hard life, started to get a little more sticky to me, because as you say, later on there may or may not be other people who start to want to join the experiment or want to be a part of this wilderness place, and the people who are there now kind of become protective and you know, want to keep them out. And it's really started to mirror just how we get about our own space, humans, maybe mostly Americans, I'd say, about our own space, our own opportunities, our own safety, our own survival becomes paramount to anybody else's. And it's not going to surprise you that I was writing this during, you know, in 2015, 2016, 2017, and 2018, and the migration or migrant debate was like getting repeated here, and people were being imprisoned at the border, and people in the States were being we're losing the ability to see other people as people, you know, like we just stopped seeing outsiders as people. All of that was coming into the book for me. All of it became a story. It's like the book quickly became so much about who belongs where, who welcome where, who should be where, and who should be, you know, somewhere. And the wilderness then became like an alien place that's either welcoming or not welcoming. And I think the wilderness for the community was that when they came in. It's a hard place, an inhospitable place, a place that it takes a long time to understand, and a place that changes them. They hope for the better, but they're not sure. And by the end, it just, I don't know, that just became so much of what was, I don't know, I'm losing my train, but that became what so much of the book was about. I do it in terrible ways and good ways too.
It's a really masterful novel. It is also incredibly cinematic. I wasn't surprised to read that it's been optioned by Warner Brothers. And I think it's going to be absolutely mesmerizing on screen. Are you involved in that production? And if not, can you tell us a bit about what might be next for you?
I am involved. When I finished this book, I really missed it. Like I wanted to stay in the world, and I thought, well, I mean, I can do that if I try and turn it into a TV show. So that's what I'm doing. So it's like, yeah, we're trying to make it into a TV show, and you know, who knows what will happen? Maybe it won't work, but I'm going to be writing the pilot. So that's my work right now, is trying to like delve into that and learn a new way to write for a new medium.
Well, fantastic. I honestly can't wait. Good luck with script writing, but more importantly, good luck for Thursday. I know I will, and I'm sure everyone who's tuned in will also be cheering you on. We'll be raising a glass. We'll be looking out to see what Barack Obama says about your book, Diane. Enjoy every minute, and thank you so much for joining us to talk about The New Wilderness today.
Thank you so much, Sara. This has been wonderful.
Same here. I've loved every minute. Take care.